when Marcus Wilson's daughter Mia was violently attacked by two fake HOA guards. His quiet neighborhood turned into a battleground. The imposters had no right to intimidate her, and their cold disregard for her pain pushed Marcus to the brink. But Marcus wasn't just a father. He was a U.S. Marshal, and with a single move, he flipped the situation entirely. Wait until you hear how the final twist changed everything, and why, in the end, justice was truly served. Marcus Wilson had always believed in the safety of his quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where kids played in the streets and neighbors smiled as they passed by. But that sunny afternoon, something broke that fragile sense of security. His 14-year-old daughter, Mia, was outside, playing with a soccer ball on the driveway. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. She was a good kid, always with a smile on her face, always friendly to everyone. But today, everything would change. Out of nowhere, two strangers appeared. They wore what seemed like uniforms, dark jackets with HOA stitched on the side. At first, Marcus thought they were just another set of overzealous community enforcers, the kind who spent their time policing trivial rules. But as they approached Mia, something didn't sit right. One of them, a man with graying hair and a stern expression, started arguing with Mia. Marcus couldn't hear the details from the window, but the way he gestured, the sharpness in his voice, it didn't feel right. The other one, a woman with a rigid posture, stood behind him, arms crossed. Mia, usually so calm, looked confused and frustrated, trying to explain herself. But the more she tried, the more heated the exchange became. Marcus felt his heart race, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out why. Then it happened. The man's hand shot out, grabbing Mia's wrist with a force that made her cry out in surprise. She tried to pull away, but he twisted her arm, his grip tightening. Mia cried out in pain, her face contorted in shock and fear. In that instant, Marcus's world stopped. He burst out the door, adrenaline surging. His daughter's face was pale, tears welling up in her eyes. The man was still holding her wrist, and Mia was struggling to free herself. It was a moment of utter disbelief. Marcus's mind was racing. Why was this happening? Why were these strangers doing this to his daughter? "Mia!" he shouted, rushing towards them. The man looked at Marcus without a hint of remorse. The woman behind him didn't move, just stood there coldly, watching. "Stay out of this," the man said dismissively, not even looking at Marcus as he twisted Mia's wrist further, his grip relentless. Marcus froze, the world spinning. His daughter's pain echoed in his mind, but the shock was paralyzing. Was this really happening? In his own driveway? He stepped forward, words failing him. The sight of Mia's tear-streaked face made him feel helpless. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The man didn't even flinch when Marcus finally spoke, his voice shaking with anger. "What the hell are you doing to my daughter?" The moment stretched on, and Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of injustice. These people, with no real authority, were treating his daughter like a criminal. And as the pain radiated from Mia's wrist, something snapped inside him. But it was the look on the man's face, utter indifference, that shook Marcus to the core. It was as if they were untouchable. And at that moment, Marcus realized this wasn't just an argument over a silly rule. It was an abuse of power, and he wasn't going to let it stand. His world wasn't just shattered, it was burning. His daughter was hurt, and the people responsible for it had no care, no empathy. And in that moment, Marcus knew this wasn't going to end quietly. This was only the beginning. Marcus's breath came in shallow gasps as he knelt beside Mia, cradling her injured arm. The pain was evident in her eyes, but it was the anger burning in his chest that took over. His mind raced, thoughts tumbling over one another in a haze. This wasn't just an accident. This was something more. His hand shook as he reached for his phone, trying to dial 911, but as he looked up at the two strangers standing in his driveway, that anger erupted like a firestorm. The woman had moved slightly closer, her arms crossed, as she watched him with an unsettling calm. The man, still gripping Mia's wrist, met his gaze with an icy stare that made Marcus's blood boil. "You don't need the cops," the man sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "We're just doing our jobs." Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief. "Your job," he growled, trying to keep his voice steady, but the heat in his chest was too much to contain. "You don't have any right to touch my daughter. You're not even real authorities." The man's laugh was cruel, like a knife twisting deeper into Marcus's gut. "We don't need badges or credentials," the man said dismissively. "We have authority here, and you're not in a position to question it." Every word they spoke fueled the fire inside Marcus. His daughter was in pain, and these two imposters, these people, had the nerve to act like they were above reproach. It wasn't just the pain in Mia's face or the injustice of the situation. It was the way they dismissed him, like he didn't matter, like Mia didn't matter. Marcus's hand tightened around his phone, his knuckles white. "I'm calling the police," he said, more firmly this time, but his voice betrayed the fury inside him. He pressed the screen to dial 911 again, but the woman stepped forward, blocking his path. "You really think the police are going to care about your little neighborhood dispute?" she mocked, the venom in her voice cold and calculating. "Do you honestly think anyone will believe you over us?" It wasn't just the words that struck Marcus. It was the way they spoke, like they knew no one would hold them accountable, like they were untouchable, above the law, and that realization hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. These people had no fear. They were using whatever authority they thought they had to cause harm, and they didn't care if they hurt anyone in the process. The woman's smirk was almost too much to bear. She wasn't even pretending to be sorry. Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline. He wanted to make them feel the same helplessness Mia had just experienced. He wanted them to know what it felt like to be powerless, but his thoughts were scattered, his emotions raw. His daughter was still crying, clutching her wrist, and that sound cut deeper than anything else. The fury, the frustration, it all mixed into one overwhelming wave. They were nothing, just two people pretending to have power, using fear as a weapon. And Marcus wasn't going to let that stand. His eyes narrowed, a cold resolve taking over. He was done talking. He wasn't going to let these people, these imposters, walk away from this. From this, unscathed, thinking they had gotten away with it. Marcus was going to make sure they paid for what they'd done. And as he stood there, the anger that burned in his chest gave way to something else. Determination. They would regret underestimating him. They would regret thinking they could bully his daughter and get away with it. There was only one thing left to do. He wasn't just going to call the police. He was going to make sure they never hurt anyone again. Marcus didn't hesitate. He turned on his heel and stormed into his house, his pulse thumping in his ears. The sight of Mia, still clutching her wrist in pain, pushed him forward. He needed to act. He marched straight to the drawer where he kept his U.S. Marshal ID. It wasn't just a badge. It was a symbol of authority, of power that these two pretenders couldn't possibly understand. It was the very thing they had been trying to dismiss. With a quick motion, Marcus snatched it up, feeling the familiar weight of the badge in his hand. It was more than just a piece of identification. It was his shield, his ticket to justice, the knowledge that despite everything, he wasn't just some powerless civilian. He was trained. He was someone who could make them pay. He stormed back outside, feeling his anger surge again with each step. The fake guards were still there, standing tall, acting like they owned the street. But their arrogance didn't last long. They saw him coming, and the mocking smiles on their faces only grew wider. "What's this?" the man sneered. "Gonna pretend to be a real cop now?" The woman laughed, crossing her arms. "That's cute," she mocked, not even bothering to hide her contempt. "You think your little badge is gonna change anything?" Marcus didn't answer them. He didn't need to. He moved swiftly like a practiced professional, pulling the badge from his pocket and flashing it in their faces. "I'm a U.S. Marshal," he said, his voice cold, controlled, "and I'm placing you both under arrest for assault and impersonating an officer." The laughter stopped, but it was the way their faces fell that made Marcus feel the first stirrings of satisfaction. The man's bravado disappeared instantly, replaced by something that resembled fear. The woman stiffened, her smug expression cracking just slightly. They didn't expect this. They thought they could keep pushing him around, keep hurting people, because they thought they were untouchable. But now, the tables had turned. Now, they were the ones who had to answer for their actions. Marcus stepped forward, his movements deliberate and precise. He grabbed the man's wrist first, twisting it behind his back with practiced ease. The man didn't even have time to react. The woman tried to step back, but Marcus was faster. In a smooth motion, he had her too, cuffing her hands behind her back before she could even register what was happening. Their struggle was brief, laughably brief. The weight of their arrogance now dissolved, replaced by the sharp realization that they were no longer in control. The woman's defiance melted into silence, while the man, unable to hide his panic, muttered something under his breath that Marcus couldn't make out. But he didn't care. He could feel the heat of his anger still simmering beneath the surface, a burning intensity that had fueled him from the moment he'd seen Mia hurt. But as he looked at the two of them, now cuffed and powerless, a sense of satisfaction washed over him. This was justice. They were no longer the ones holding the power. They were the ones who would answer for their actions. It wasn't just about the pain they caused Mia. It was about the principle, about taking back control. Marcus hadn't just been defending his daughter, he had been defending his right, his duty to stand up to injustice. And in that moment, watching them squirm in defeat, he knew they realized it too. They weren't in charge anymore, and Marcus Wilson was not someone they'd ever forget. The sound of sirens finally pierced the air, growing louder as the real police cruisers pulled up to the scene. Marcus stood back, his arms folded across his chest, as two officers stepped out. He didn't need to explain anything. They could see it all for themselves. The man and woman, still handcuffed, were standing in the yard, looking every bit the frauds they were. The officers didn't waste any time. They approached the pair, checking their fake IDs and confirming what Marcus had already known. They weren't legitimate security guards. They were nothing but imposters, playing at authority in a community that trusted them. "Cuff 'em," one of the officers said coldly, his voice firm. The woman's face flushed red, but there was nothing she could do. The man's eyes darted around, desperate for an escape, but the cuffs biting into his wrists were the harsh reality. The fake guards were now just criminals in the back of a squad car. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't need to say a word. He had already said everything that needed to be said when he showed them his badge. Now, it was over. He looked over at Mia, who was sitting on the front steps, still cradling her injured wrist. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clearer now, no longer clouded with fear. The pain would fade. She would heal. Marcus had no doubt about that. "Dad," Mia called softly, her voice tentative. "Are they really going to jail?" Marcus knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Yeah, they are. They'll answer for what they did." Mia gave a small nod, the relief washing over her as she realized the danger had passed. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. His heart was still racing, his mind still reeling from the adrenaline, but there was a deep satisfaction settling in his chest now. Justice had been served. He'd done the right thing. He hadn't backed down. He hadn't let those two people take what was his family, his sense of security. And now, they would pay for what they had done. As the police car drove off, the fake guards locked inside. Marcus stood there for a few moments longer. He wasn't just a father now. He was a protector, someone who had taken action when it mattered most. And for the first time in hours, Marcus let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He had done what needed to be done. The terror these imposters had caused in his community was over, and the people who thought they could play with others' lives had been brought to justice. Mia would recover. The neighborhood would heal. And Marcus, he'd done his duty. There was no greater satisfaction than knowing that.